Hi, welcome to Delenta's Elevate event where we talk about overcoming the imposter today. My name is Karina Hagen. I am the VP Marketing at Delenta, and I have an exciting guest with me today, Kris Kelso. I will introduce him in a minute, but before we go there, I want to share with you a little bit about Delenta Elevate, what to expect here if you are new to those events. What is Delenta Elevate? So during these events, these are live streams that we try to keep highly engaging, where you can ask questions to the experts, and those experts we invite are speaking on topics like GDPR, or how to use MailChimp, how to fill up your lead pipeline, and we have another event coming up. So wait until the end of this event. We have an event coming up tomorrow. We will announce it in a few minutes. But I also want to share with you a little bit about Delenta for those of you who are not familiar with us yet. So Delenta is an all-in-one coaching platform. Our goal is to enable you to be able to use really just one place to run both your front end and your back end applications. That means that you have a landing page that you can give to your clients as the website that they can use to see your profile, view your coaching packages, and book appointments. You can use it for lead capturing, and you can use it for the back end to run your invoicing, to schedule your sessions, create online courses, take coaching notes during your sessions, and more. And so that is what we do as Delenta. You can find a full demo on our website, but you can also schedule a live demo with one of our team members to get a quick walkthrough on how this works. Now, we integrate with a lot of very useful and popular tools like PayPal or MailChimp or Google Calendar or Zoom, to just name a few, to replace really the back and forth between those tools, so you don't have to manually do that, and can do this all from one platform. And that saves you not just time, but it should also save you money. And so if you want to find out about the pricing, go to our pricing page. But we also want to share with you that we have new features coming up. The latest ones that just joined are custom branding and online courses, but we're excited to tell you that we will have a mobile app coming up and Delenta Teams, where you can manage your coaching practice, having multiple coaches join your team. And so with that, I would like to now introduce my my guest, Kris Kelso. Kris is a keynote speaker, an entrepreneur, and he's the author of Overcoming the Impostor, Silence Your Inner Critic and Lead with Confidence. And he's trained as an executive coach. He has worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, business owners, and their leadership teams. And Kris is a faculty instructor at the Professional Christian Coaching Institute that I had attended as well. So it's really exciting to hear that he's doing that. He's also an advisor and instructor at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center. He is a facilitator and coach with the Alternative Board, and is a contributing writer for publications including Fast Company magazine, Yahoo Finance, and the Nashville Business Journal. Wow, that's a mouthful. Kris, thank you so much. It's amazing to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Karina. I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, we have spoken before, with Coachilli, and when I had first read your book, and I remember there were so many great insights in there, and I couldn't believe how many times I found myself thinking, yes, I have had those thoughts. I can relate. And your
I
advice
hear that
is
so
great.
often. So I've had several people tell me, "Did you write this book about me? Have you been watching me?" Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And what's even greater is you not only make it relatable by telling these stories, you have very practical advice in there.
Mm,
And I should say, not just, for handling this personally, but also something that as a coach, and this will be interesting to the audience that we have on the line today, right? We're talking about other coaches, that you can also use this in your coaching sessions, because you have very practical steps and questions to
yes.
reflect on at the end of each chapter. But, enough of me. I'll let you get started, because I want to hear more, and the audience wants to hear more about how do we overcome the imposter.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, in addition to the intro that Karina gave me, I'll tell you that I've been an entrepreneur for really the majority of my adult life, and during that time, I've founded multiple companies. I've led turnaround efforts. I've been an advisor to investors, and I've even taught classes at universities and organizations on entrepreneurship. But there's one little detail. There's one nugget that doesn't often get mentioned in a bio or a history of my background or story. And that detail is that for a lot of that time, I really didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. I really, I didn't feel like I had a handle. I felt like I was learning as I went, as I was making it up as I went along. So I started my first company in my early 30s, and I had no business experience whatsoever, and really no business education. I don't even have a college degree. I never went to college. And so I remember going to a large bookstore and buying a stack of books. You could see some of them behind me. Um, Big stack of books on everything I thought I needed to know to run a small business. How to write contracts, how to scope consulting engagements, how to deal with the finances and marketing and sales. And I just started reading these books, and I got to work. And those first few years in business as an entrepreneur, almost everything I did, I was doing for the first time. And I was learning as I went. And whatever I felt like I needed to know, I just figured out a way to learn it, often in real time. Now, I love to learn. I'm a learner personality, and I really enjoy learning new things. So I enjoyed that immensely. But every now and then I would get in a situation where someone would call me the expert, or they would look to me as if I really had it all figured out. And I would feel a little guilty, like maybe I had pulled the wool over their eyes, or maybe I had deceived them unintentionally. I certainly didn't hold myself out as the expert, but I started to be seen that way. And even though there was plenty of evidence that I was successful in my business, in my mind, sometimes I felt like a fraud. I felt illegitimate. And then one day in my learning, I learned about this thing called imposter syndrome. Now, for those who aren't familiar, imposter syndrome is a psychological term that was coined in the 1970s, actually. And it refers to the tendency of many people, it turns out, to overvalue other people's accomplishments and to undervalue or even doubt the reality of their own success. See, what happens is I look at another entrepreneur and I think, well, boy, they're successful because they're smart and they're educated and they seem to have a plan and execute it well, and they've just really got it all together. Whereas my success has been a lot of trial and error, and boy, some things have just sort of gone my way. Maybe there's some luck and timing involved, and I certainly know there's a lot of cracks and flaws and a lot of mistakes that I've made along the way that people don't see. And the underlying fear of imposter syndrome is that sooner or later, someone or everyone is going to figure out that you really don't know what you're doing, that you'll be exposed as a fraud, that you're just making it up as you go. And that if that happens, it's all going to come crumbling down around you. I used to literally imagine that I would be sitting in a room full of educated business people, MBAs all around, and somebody would bring up some principle or some model that was taught on the very first day of business school, which of course I did not attend. And so they would say something like, well, of course we can't do that because of the Thompson principle. Kris, you know the Thompson principle, right? And then the entire room would turn and look at me, waiting for me to give some commentary on the Thompson principle. And so as beads of sweat would start forming on the back of my neck, I would stammer around and try to say something halfway intelligent until it became clear to everybody that I had no idea what the Thompson principle was. And at that point, some men in dark sunglasses and black suits would come in and say, "Excuse me, sir, you're going to have to come with us." So, of course, that never happened. And by the way, if you're sitting there wondering what the Thompson principle is or whether you should know that, just don't worry about it. I just made that up. There is no Thompson principle. But that fear, that feeling of, oh man, maybe there's something that I should know that I don't know, and that's going to hurt me. That's what I'm talking about. So for the longest time, I had this nagging voice inside my head. This voice that would try to convince me that it wasn't real, that my business and my success was a fluke. And it would say things like, you're not really a business owner. You're just a guy doing some consulting. Or you don't really know what you're doing. You just know how to sound like you know what you're doing. These people, you've got them all fooled. Sometimes it would say, you're the only one who doesn't deserve to be sitting at this table. You're the only one that doesn't fit in this crowd. And over time, as I had more success, my business grew, I was achieving things, I was hiring people, that voice in my head would change tactics. It would say things like, your business isn't a real business until you have employees. And your business isn't a real business until you have a physical office space. Your business isn't a real business until you get to $1 million in revenue. Your business isn't a real business until you have a full management team. And so no matter what I achieved, no matter how far I would get, that voice would always find some milestone or some other angle to try to prove to me that I wasn't yet legit, that I was still faking it somehow. Now that voice, it turns out, is very common. And it's been given a lot of names by a lot of people. It's been called the voice of self-doubt, or the voice of the gremlin, the voice of the saboteur. I have started referring to that voice simply as the imposter. And the reason is not because it's trying to convince me that I'm an imposter, which it is, but the reason is to remind me that voice in my head, that critical, self-doubting voice, isn't real. The voice itself is not real. There's no one there. That voice is the imposter. So over the years, I've been studying imposter syndrome, and I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs and found it to be very prevalent among entrepreneurs and innovators, people who are pushing the boundaries. It turns out are statistically more likely to experience feelings of self-doubt. And I've seen two primary approaches to dealing with the imposter. So the first approach that I've seen is to avoid that voice, to avoid the imposter, to stay away from any situation where you feel like you're in over your head, or you're out of your element, or you're outside your expertise. And I call this approach, or this attitude, the tour guide. Tour guides, they put tight boundaries around their comfort zone, and they stick to the areas where they really feel confident, and they won't go outside of those boundaries. They make the same basic loop again and again, and they build their expertise through repetition. I've done this so many times that I know it and I can feel confident. Tour guides act like a leader, but they really are only willing to take people where they've already been and where they feel like they have the upper hand. They understand and they know what they're doing. Tour guides don't ask a lot of questions. They primarily answer questions. They like to be the expert. And they really hate it when somebody knows more than they do, because that threatens their confidence. It gives power to that voice that maybe they're not the expert. And I've been guilty at times of feeling like of acting like a tour guide, of thinking like a tour guide in certain circumstances. But it puts limits on you. It puts boundaries on you. And so the other attitude, the other approach that I've seen to dealing with the imposter doesn't avoid it, doesn't try to stay away from it. It disarms the imposter. So I call this approach the explorer. So you've got tour guides and you have explorers. See, explorers are people that are not only unafraid to enter into new territory, they actually look forward to learning something new. They look forward to getting into an area that's unfamiliar because there's a learning opportunity there. And explorers understand that sometimes you go down a certain path and you realize that it's not going to get you where you want to be. It's not the right way to go. And so you have to double back and you have to turn around. But explorers know that hitting a dead end and turning around is not failure, it's learning. It's part of the process of exploring. Explorers are comfortable bringing other experts around them and asking the question, does anybody else know more about this territory than I do? And explorers are comfortable with saying, I don't know, but I bet we can figure it out. I bet we can get there if we work together, if we explore, if we experiment, if we try. So when that voice of the imposter comes and says something like, you're in over your head here, you're in a group of people that intimidate you because they're all smarter than you, or they're all more successful than you, they're all more experienced than you, you're at risk. The tour guide looks for an exit. They want to get back to their tour, back to their safe zone, back to the place where they can be the expert. But an explorer leans into those uncomfortable moments and said, this is the place to be. This is where I have an opportunity to learn and grow and stretch. Now that mental shift, that mentality from tour guide to, or from tour guide to explorer, it's a big shift. But it can happen really, really quickly. And I'll give you an example. I was working with one of my clients as a coach. I was working with a man, I'll call him James. And James had been a very successful entrepreneur and then an in-demand consultant when he was eventually recruited and hired by one of the biggest companies in his field. And the company hired him and tasked him with building out an entirely new line of business, something that the company had never done before. And in fact, something that James had never done before. This was new territory. Now, you would think that as an entrepreneur, that this would be right up his alley, right? Creating something from scratch, building something new. But something about this big company and the environment he was in, something about this situation had him thinking like a tour guide. And he was feeling a lot of pressure to give an expert tour of how this new line of business was supposed to work. He felt like he had to have all the answers, like he had to know everything. And he was at risk in his mind of giving a wrong answer, of saying something wrong, of making a wrong move and losing this opportunity. So there was a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. But as I began to work with James and we were coaching together and we were talking about these mindset differences, he had an aha moment. The light bulb came on when he realized that he had put that pressure on himself, that no one else really expected him to have all the answers. See, James had built much of his career being an explorer, being an experimenter, doing trial and error, learning through the process. And that's what had made him successful. And this company had not hired him because he had done this thing before. The company had hired him because he had done so many other things before. So that difference was a light bulb moment that they didn't expect him to have all the answers. They expected him to do what he does and go figure out the answers. And I could just feel the weight lifted off his shoulders. I could hear the energy in his voice as he said, I don't have to have all the answers. I just have to go figure out those answers. And within a few weeks, I talked to him again, and he said his ideas were flowing. He was getting comfortable with his peers, just thinking out loud and expressing an opinion that wasn't fully thought through and that might still be wrong, but being more open to ideas and opportunities. And his relationships were improving, his ideas were flowing, and his boss had even commented about the difference in his work. So he started exploring again. He adopted that explorer mindset, and it made a huge difference in his work, in his stress level, and in the product of what he was doing in this big company. So this shift in mindset, it takes some help from other people, like a coach, like a colleague, or someone that you can open up to and talk to. So we need to be connected with others. We need to be in community in order to overcome that voice of self-doubt. That imposter wants to isolate us. It wants to make us feel like we're the only ones. that we're all alone, that I'm the only person who doesn't have it all figured out. But when you're connected to other people, community is where you see that the challenges that you face are very similar to the challenges that other people have faced and beaten before you, and even others are facing alongside you today. So we need to be connected to get that right perspective and to adopt that right mindset and remain in an explorer mindset. However, the benefits of community, unfortunately, are not automatic. Just because you're in relationship with people doesn't mean that you're going to get the support that you need. And the reason is because in some communities, everybody's got their game face on. Everybody's in sales mode. Everybody's presenting the very best version of themselves and their work and their business. And when that happens, when you're in a group of people that have all got their game face on and are all trying to position themselves as the best, it's really, really easy to feel like you're the only one that has a lot of cracks and flaws under the surface. But there's a key ingredient. There's one element that's critical to making the difference between a community that works for you versus a community that works against you. Some number of years ago, I worked with a young entrepreneur. He had started his business just out of college, and he had landed some money, some investment money from a big name, famous investor, someone whose name you would know if I said it. And he was telling me all about his business, and he was giving me his story and this great idea that he had and how things were going. And I could tell, I could just sense that I was getting the sales pitch. I was getting the polished up version. And I knew, I just had an intuition that there were some cracks and flaws and even some insecurity and fear underneath the surface. So I did something. I started to open up to this young man. I started to share a little bit of my entrepreneurial journey, and not the highlight reel, but I talked to him about some of the challenges, some of the fears, some of the difficulties that I'd faced, and how I had to work through some of those moments of weakness. And as I opened up to him, his eyes began to water. He teared up, and he said to me, "Kris, this is the first real conversation that I've had with anyone about how hard this is." See, he was struggling to measure up to all the confident entrepreneurs that he saw around him. He was struggling because the imposter was working on him, telling him, "You don't know what you're doing. You've got a lot of cracks. You've got a lot of flaws. You're making mistakes all the time, and everybody else seems to have it figured out." But when I opened up to him, when I got vulnerable, when I got authentic, when I got real with him, I extended him a lifeline. I gave him hope for his situation, that he wasn't the only one that was struggling behind the scenes. It was a powerful moment that I've never forgotten. And since that time, I've really tried to be more intentional about being vulnerable with people, about introducing vulnerability and honesty to the relationships that I'm in and the communities that I'm a part of. And what I've found is that vulnerability is a key that unlocks the power of community. And that when I'm vulnerable, I don't just help the people that I'm being vulnerable with, but it benefits me as well. You see, when people give me compliments, when people pat me on the back or tell me they admire me, but I haven't been vulnerable, it's easy to dismiss those things. It's easy to feel like they don't really know the truth. But when I'm authentic, when I'm vulnerable, and people still respect me, and they still tell me they appreciate what I bring to the table and what I contribute and what I've done, it's so much more meaningful. It's so much more real, because I know that it's not based on some illusion or some half truth about who I am. So I want to issue a challenge to you today. Everyone who's watching, I want to challenge you to be more vulnerable and to tell your real story to someone. Share your journey as an entrepreneur, as a business person, as a coach, as whatever you're doing, share your story with someone, and not just the polished up version that you would put on a resume or that you would write up for a bio to be introduced to a group of people, but the real version of your story. Tell them about the wins and the losses. Tell them about the triumphs and the struggles. I think the response that you get is going to be different than maybe what you expected. And over time, you'll start to learn what I've learned, and that is that community without vulnerability will feed the imposter, but community with vulnerability will starve the imposter. I'm going to say that again. Community without vulnerability, if you're not vulnerable, if everybody's fronting, it's going to feed the imposter. It's going to make that self-doubt, that inner voice, it's going to make it worse. But community with vulnerability will disarm the imposter. It'll tear down. It takes all the weapons away. See, imposter syndrome at the root is the fear of vulnerability. It's the fear of other people figuring out who and what you really are. But the irony is that vulnerability is the cure. Vulnerability is exactly what you need to overcome those feelings of self-doubt. Now, vulnerability is not just about acknowledging your weaknesses, okay? It's not just about being honest about your struggles. It's also about owning and accepting your strengths, of owning the things, the gifts that you have, the things that you have done. One of the symptoms of imposter syndrome is the inability to accept a compliment at face value. Have you ever done this? When someone pays you a compliment, you brush it off with a joke, or you deflect it with sarcasm, or you talk about how it wasn't that really big a deal. You downplay the compliment, or you try to point it at someone else or somewhere else. Have you ever thought about the fact that when someone pays you a compliment and you deflect it or divert it, that you're actually insulting that person? They gave you a gift. They offered you an opinion. They took a risk, and you downplayed it. I'm as guilty of this as any of you. You're devaluing their opinion. You're telling them that their standards are too low, or that they don't know what they're talking about. And whether we realize it or not, we may actually be offending the people that are trying to help us. So can we all just agree to stop doing that? Can we just stop deflecting compliments? The next time someone compliments you, I want you to plant your feet, look them straight in the eye, and with all sincerity say, "Thank you. I really appreciate that. I worked so hard on that, and it's great to know that my work is appreciated." That's it. No qualifications, no deflection, no sarcasm. Just own it. Accept it. Receive it for the gift that it is, and honor the person who gave it to you in that process. So as I begin to wrap up here, for the last several years now, I've been on a journey of both learning and teaching about imposter syndrome. And I wrote a book on this subject during the pandemic in 2020, Overcoming the Imposter. And it's filled with stories of not just me, but dozens of other entrepreneurs and business leaders and people that have faced these challenges in different ways. And I've practiced being more vulnerable as I've learned the power of vulnerability. And I've gotten comfortable saying, I don't know. I don't always have all the answers, but I bet we can figure it out. I bet we can explore together. And I bet we can get the answers we need to get. I've also gotten better at accepting compliments without sarcasm most of the time, because that's hard for me. But I've gotten better at accepting the compliments that people give me, and realizing that I do have some things to offer, that I do have some accomplishments that are worth celebrating. And I've also gotten to a point where I can walk into a room full of brilliant, successful people that I admire and respect, and I can actually feel like I belong there. I can feel comfortable that they have something to offer, and I do too. And there's great opportunity in those moments. When I wrote this book and I wrote this talk that I'm giving you today, and a longer speech that I've given to bigger audiences at other events, I really wanted to end with a pinnacle moment, a crescendo where I show you what it's like to beat the imposter forever. But the reality is that's just not that's not what it means. That's not how it works. Overcoming the imposter is not a one-time event. There's not a moment where you reach the finish line or you strike the death blow or you reach the summit and you're done. See, overcoming imposter syndrome and overcoming that nagging voice, it starts with awareness. And that's what I've given you today is an understanding of the mental game that goes on inside of our heads, and the fact that this is more common than we think, and that anyone who is doing something innovative or is pushing their boundaries is going to run up against this at some point in their career. But once you have awareness, the battle is fought in 1,000 tiny decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis. It's fought when you decide that you're going to speak confidently about your ideas, even though they're not fully thought through, even though you're still open to changing them. But you're going to put yourself out there and experiment with people. It happens when you cast off the fear of exposure, when you allow yourself to be vulnerable and tell your real story and trust and believe that that's going to be helpful and it's not going to hurt. It happens when you realize that no single decision or mistake that you make is ever going to sink you or destroy your career, that they're all just stepping stones on your path to success, that exploring and experimenting is part of the process. And it happens when you learn to enjoy your success, to accept the compliments that people give you, and to be open to feedback that's not only negative and constructive feedback, but great feedback and encouraging feedback. And it happens when you recognize the work of the imposter in someone else, and you tell them a little bit about your story, and you open up and share your own journey with the imposter, and you give them hope for their situation. You can be a person who changes the trajectory of someone's life and career in one conversation. I've seen it happen more times than I can count. You are not an imposter. You're an explorer. So go out there and explore with confidence. Thank you.
I like that, Kris. That last statement, very powerful. You're not an imposter, you're an explorer. It's a key shift in mindset, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely is. And I make it sometimes sound really easy and simple, but simple things are not always easy. It takes practice. It takes reminding yourself over and over. It takes recognizing when you fall back into that tour guide mindset and determining to be an explorer. So it does take work, but you can do it. I believe you can.
I'm a fan of simplicity. And for a long time, I thought, well, I like simplicity and being vulnerable here. I like simplicity. That means I'm probably dumb, right? And I would say it to people. I said, I probably am too dumb. I have to simplify this. Otherwise it doesn't fit my brain. But no, I can look at complex things and I turn this into a strength. I look at complexity and the way I can communicate it better and memorize it and actually take out of it what I need to retain, because the world is so complex, we can't retain everything, right? And I don't know if you read the book, I think it was called Blink, how we slice all these pieces of information and make these snap decisions in a moment, because our brain kind of, tries to analyze everything and just has to call the shots, because we can't pay attention to everything all at the same time. And I thought, okay, so then it becomes a strength actually that I can summarize something.
In fact, I'm gonna give you a nugget of wisdom that will provide some freedom, and that is, I tell my clients all the time that it is easy to make things complicated. It's hard work to make things simple.
Very true.
And
Yep.
this is an example of what the imposter will do. See, Karina, the imposter will take something that you're good at and try to convince you that it's actually a weakness. It's a flaw. If you have a skill and a gift for simplifying things, that's incredible. And that's so needed and so valuable. But that voice in your head will tell you, oh, you have to make it simple because you're not smart enough for complexity. And that is the opposite of the truth. Really, it doesn't take a lot of brains to make things complicated, right? It takes a lot of work to simplify and boil things down to the essence. So that is a gift and a great ability that lots of organizations and lots of leaders need.
Who was that said, I would have written a shorter letter, but I ran out of time?
Yes, I think it
Right?
was Thomas Jefferson. Perhaps it was one of the founding fathers from history. Yes, said I would have written a shorter letter if I had the time.
Right? And that speaks to that, right? To keeping it short. It
Absolutely.
actually takes processing, like what actually matters. And so, I'm sharing this
Yes.
vulnerably because so one of the things that I recognize, and I want to share this here because I think this is really the right format to go through that, is observing your own language.
Yeah.
It's one thing to think this is going on in your head, but also to bring it out and saying, like, what am I thinking about myself? Like thinking about what you're thinking about, but then also acknowledging, what am I accusing myself of? Like, I might think
Yes.
this in my head, but I'm actually supporting the imposter by saying, oh, sorry, I'm too dumb to keep things for complexity, right? If I say it, now I am saying it. Now I'm partnering
Yes.
with the imposter. So I had to make a commitment and say, no, 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 no. This is no longer happening. I'll change my language around this. And I
Yeah.
articulate it as like, I can help you simplify complexity so that you can make a point, bring a point across, right? I work with a lot of executives that create executive presentations, investor pitches, all of that. You don't have time for the nitty gritty, right? They'll ask about it if they need to, but you just cannot, right? They're not interested in that. And I keep
Yeah.
calling it like the fishbowl when you go into an executive meeting, because it's, 10-second memory. You have little tidbits like these are the highlights that we're
Right.
talking about today for decision making.
Yes. Yeah. You've got to hit it hard and keep it simple. And that takes a lot of work. That's why great presentations, if you talk to professional speakers and people, they'll tell you they spend hours and hours of prep for each minute of a speech,
That's right.
to really boil it down and make it precise and perfect takes a lot of work. And that's the effort required to make something simple.
So now that I've shared an example, for those that are listening in the audience, what would be a great way to identify kind of like your most common or the loudest imposter in your life?
Hmm. Yeah. So that voice often creeps up when you're under stress, when you're feeling pressure. It's sort of the voice of insecurity. And one of the things that I've learned to do, that's really helped me a lot, is to hear that voice as a sign of opportunity. So what I mean by that is when the imposter tells me, Kris, you're in over your head, these people are too smart for you. I turn that around as, this is a good place for me to learn something. When I hear that voice say, Kris, you don't know what you're doing here. The risk of failure is high. I turn that around and say, well, failure is learning for me. When I attempt something, I've decided that I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to learn. Those are my only two options. So when that voice is telling me I'm going to fail and that's bad, I say, failure means learning. So I'm going to get something out of this. I'm going to lean into that. So it's those moments when you want to move forward, but there's something inside you that is telling you to pull back. And it can sound like wisdom. That's the challenge. It can sound like common sense. It can sound like that it's wisdom to be cautious, to not put yourself in a place of risk. But if you really evaluate the potential consequences of taking this action or joining this group or being a part of this, the potential consequences versus the potential benefits, often the imposter is trying to tip that scale so the consequences are so much worse than the potential great outcome. But most of the time, it's the opposite. The potential for something great to happen is huge, and you're worried about a teeny tiny little negative consequence that is going to be a blip on the radar in most cases. So it takes some rational evaluation of what am I really afraid of? And am I hearing wisdom or am I just hearing fear that wants to masquerade as wisdom? And that's another reason why I call it the imposter, is it wants to sound like wisdom and it's not.
Yeah, I think, as you were speaking, I was hearing, I think it was Zig Ziglar that said it, like, what if you succeed?
Yeah,
We often ask
exactly.
ourselves the opposite, right? What if I fail? What if I say something wrong? What if
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
people think badly about me? But what if they think highly of me? What if I help somebody through it? What if I learn something? What if I
Yes.
succeed in this? Yeah.
Yeah, instead of what if it goes badly and it tarnishes my reputation, you think what if it goes well and it enhances my reputation? What if I gain a client from this? What if I actually say something that changes somebody's life? What's the possibility then? Rather than what if I say something stupid? Well, if you say something stupid, people are likely to forget it. If you say something that changes someone's life, they're not likely to forget it. And so
Right.
there again, the potential upside is so much greater than the potential downside. But that voice wants to just push us into a corner and make us fear those negative outcomes that are often, improbable.
Yeah. Yeah, I've also realized that, when you talked earlier about like perfection versus vulnerability, right? When you're kind of too well rounded, you make no mistake, right? You're too
Yeah.
perfect. Then you also
Yeah.
don't make a connection. It dehumanizes you, right? Nobody is perfect. We all make
Yes.
mistakes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not taking enough risk. So I
Mm,
would look at if you're not ever making any mistakes, if you've had no failures, then you're playing it too safe. And there's more out there for you if you're willing to go get it.
that's fantastic. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about today, and I would love to welcome you back in the future, is how you use this not just for the entrepreneurs, but also how you use overcoming the imposter to create a group coaching program, which I know you have done.
Yes.
So maybe we can talk about that going forward. But if we have any questions, let me see real quick if Danya has any. Do we have any questions from the audience to discuss? Oh, we have a comment here. All right. I do it all the time. Yeah. Okay. Pooja was relating. It was relatable to her. Um, so great. Yeah. If we don't have any, oh, we do. That was mine. Okay. Earlier. Yeah. Would you
Yeah.
say that exaggerating your flaws, right? If that's part of imposter syndrome, if you think that you're not good in something, but you don't know, and now you're inflating this.
Yeah, I think sometimes when I hear people exaggerate their flaws or try to, it's an attempt to um, acknowledge their weaknesses out of a fear that they have a blind spot. So it's almost like you want to make sure nobody thinks that you think you're perfect. So you go overboard to talk about a mistake or a problem. Or so there's
Mm.
so sometimes there's two extremes. Some people imposter syndrome makes them try to cover their flaws and pretend they don't exist, and others will sort of exaggerate something that's really not that big a deal because in that case, the fear is more about the fear that people will see them as prideful or arrogant or that they have a blind spot. So maybe as I talk it out loud, it's not as much imposter syndrome as sort of another psychological trick going on, but it's still an imbalance that causes you to exaggerate something that you really don't need to.
Interesting. Well, Kris, thank you so much for joining us today. You shared really relatable stories, and I could see in the chat that it resonated with the audience. So thank you so much for joining today. Please, everybody, go to Kris's website, kriskelso.com, and check out his book, Overcoming the Imposter. You get that book on Amazon, I believe, in both print and Kindle version.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
available just about anywhere you buy books, or you can order it direct from overcomingtheimposter.com.
Even greater. That's awesome. And I see here we'll put on the screen that you get additional resources there. That's fantastic. So yeah, please check out his resources and then come back next week. I want to share my screen real quick because we have an event coming up tomorrow actually. So come back tomorrow to listen to our new podcast in Coaches Connect, where we talk about how to know when it is the right time to invest in tools, systems, and processes. Jo Rianti will talk about this. She is a management consultant with a lot of experience here. So make sure you're coming back tomorrow for this. And you find this both on the Delenta website, and you can also find this on our LinkedIn page, where we post a link to the event. So thank you again, Kris, and everybody. Have a great rest of the afternoon or evening, wherever you are in this world.
Thanks, Karina. It was fun.
Thank